Hi, Facebook and YouTube. We are live here for the next installment of our Tuesday Live series. We're going to talk all about how to find your ideal editor. I'm going to give you some tips for that. So I'm going to bring in Instagram and then we'll get started. Hi, Instagram. Thanks for coming. We are live here on Instagram and over here on Facebook and YouTube. Got a little bit different setup today. I keep rearranging this room, so that's why it's a different setup. But we're going to talk today tips about finding your ideal editor. So if you are currently writing your book or self-editing your book, or you're done with your edits and you just need to find a professional editor, this live is for you. We're going to go through all kinds of tips on finding your ideal editor, finding the right editor for your book, for your manuscript, so that you can actually work with them and you both are a team to make your book the very best it can be. So, and also if you hang on toward the end, I do have a free gift for you as well, just for coming. So be sure to stay for that. Also, if you have any questions about the process of finding an editor or even just writing in general, I'd love to discuss those with you. We can chat about those and give a discussion. So here we go. Tips for finding your ideal editor. First, you want to do your own editing before you find an editor. So if you were to write your first draft and then you don't edit it at all, you might struggle when you go to hire a professional editor. A few things can happen. The editor might actually do a sample edit, which I'll talk about in a little bit what that is and if that's a good idea. So the editor might do a sample edit, and based on that sample edit, they may charge you a higher price because it needs a lot of editing. Another thing is, if you wrote your book, you know what you're trying to say, but it doesn't always come across on the page like you intended it to. This is why when I'm writing, I actually will go back and reread what I wrote maybe the previous day and make a few little tweaks to make sure that actually what I was intending to say came across. And if you don't do your own self-editing, you can't catch those things that the editor, because they can't read your mind as the author, they're not going to be able to intuit what you were saying. And when they're working on it, sometimes months after you had written it, they might ask you a question like, what are you trying to say here? And you may not even remember because it's been so long since you wrote it. So it's always a good idea to do your own self-editing. Now, again, and I say again because I've talked about this before, not today, but if you can edit while you're writing without it slowing down your process, then I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But again, it can't slow down your writing. For me, I write something one day, I leave it, sleep on it. And then the next day when I go to write again, I usually reread what I wrote the previous day. For me, that helps me get in the frame of mind that I was the previous day. Again, I can catch all those little errors that maybe I knew, like I had a scene once that I wrote and it was just so much fun and I was so in love with it. And then I read it back the next day and it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. And it just didn't quite come across. So I was able to tweak it a little bit before I moved on. Now, that's my process. It doesn't work for everyone. So if it doesn't work for you to go back and edit until you're done with your book, that's totally fine too. A lot of authors work that way as well. So moral of the story, find your process and what works for you. And don't feel bad if someone else tells you, well, you can't do it that way, because it's not true. We all write differently. We all have different ways that we do things. So my hair is just in my face today. Okay. So that was the first one. Do your own self-editing because the editor can't read your mind. The more eyes that are on it, the better. So, and yes, that includes you as the author. So yes, you've written it and it came from your brain, but once you switch from writing brain to editing brain, you can catch things that you wouldn't normally catch or that you didn't catch when you were in the flow of writing, and you shouldn't. I mean, you shouldn't catch those things that when you're in that flow, you shouldn't be looking for making sure you use the right word and all that stuff. That's not the priority while you're writing. The writing portion of it, the drafting, is to get the words on the page. And then you can go behind and edit. And another benefit of self-editing is so that you can understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, so you can identify where your money for editing will best be spent, where you need professional help, if you want to say it that way. So there are different types of editors, and I do have a YouTube channel up on my, I think it's Types of Book Editing is what it's called, on my YouTube channel, and the link's in my bio on Instagram, and if you're on YouTube, well, you know how to find it. But it's called Types of Book Editing, and it goes through in detail all the different types of book editing there are. So I'll give you a brief overview, but if you want more detail, you can check out that video. So there's developmental editing, which is basically looking at story arc and plot holes and overall effectiveness of the story. There are line or copy editing, which is what I generally do for my clients when I edit. And that looks on a sentence or paragraph level, which is why it's called line editing, and makes edits the book for readability and clarity and flow and pacing and show versus tell, of course, because that's my thing, and all kinds of things like that. Now, they might catch things that development editor may not catch, or they might say this character doesn't quite feel so real to me, or they might, but they're generally looking on a line level for that. And that line level does allow them to catch some of those developmental things. But for the most part, they're not looking at the overall story. They're not looking at the story arc, the plot holes, the act 1, act 2, act 3. They're not looking at that as a whole. They're looking at the line editing, make sure that it's readable and flows well, and the pacing is set up so that the reader just can't stop reading. Okay, and then there's proofreading, which is basically once all of that's done, you do a final proofread to see all of the different, like just to make sure all the nitty gritty, like the really detailed stuff is in order. And I do that as well for my clients. I can do it separately, but generally I put it with the copy and line editing. So I do like 2 different pass-throughs. So I do like a copy line edit, and then I get their feedback, and then I do a final proofread. So that's kind of how that works. You kind of see the hierarchy there. So when you do your own self-editing, you can identify where your gaps are, where your weaknesses are. And then you can find that type of editor to hire for your book. Now, if you have unlimited funds, you might just want to hire all 3. You might just want to find a developmental editor, then get a copy editor, then hire an additional proofreader. I realize a lot of us don't have unlimited funds, so it makes more sense to really focus your funds and your attention on the places that need work. So for example, if you can handle the developmental edits yourself, usually by and a lot of times you can utilize alpha and beta feedback for this, so that they give you the feedback on the developmental without actually getting the developmental edit done. So it'll still give you feedback, but then you are actually doing the edit yourself. And then you would pay for copy and line editing, which a lot of authors aren't as skilled in, I guess is the right way to say it, because authors are focused on the writing craft and the story itself and developing characters and things like that. And so sometimes that's not the same skill set. It's actually not the same skill set. Some people have both, but a lot of authors do not. And so they choose to hire that out. And then proofreading, it's always a good idea to have a second pair of eyes on your manuscript. I include it in my book editing contracts to help try to bring the cost down for the author, as well as because it always needs a final look over. Like there's always things I catch on the proofread, even though I've been through it once, because you need to look in that different frame of reference. So I've done the copy edit. I know that it's clear. And then I can go back and do the proofread and look for punctuation and things like that. It's all a matter of, and this is how developmental editing works as well, where you're going through different pass-throughs and you're looking for different things. So like for me, when I do it, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but this just kind of gets into self-editing, which is a very important topic. Maybe we'll talk about that soon. But anyway, so when you get to the self-editing process in the developmental edits, you have several different things you can look for. And I have a resource for this called the Self-Editing Ebook Bundle. It takes you through all these different steps and questions to ask and things to look for and all the different drafts that you can do with developmental editing. And then also beyond that with proofreading and copy editing. And even there's an additional draft that I like to throw in there if you tend to be an overwriter. It's a good one for you. So that's also available in, I believe it's links in my bio, and it's also on my website, indieauthorlearning.com. But so developmental edits, you want to look for several different things. Like maybe you'll do an edit for timeline. So I actually do this myself where I almost do, I forget what it's called, but like on movies where they, when they're making movies, and I forget what it's called now. Ugh. Anyway, so basically it's like the scene, like the snapshot of each scene. So they take like for me, there, of course, when you're writing a book, you don't need to know it maybe as much as if you're doing a movie because you don't need to know where the actors are going to be specifically and all that kind of stuff. But I do track like what time of day it is, so I know where the sun would be. If it's sunrise, there's going to be different light than if it's, you know, dark night, middle of the night, middle of the day, you know, that kind of stuff. So you just track kind of all of those different things. And then you could have another edit for looking at character development, make sure our characters are good. You could have an edit for plot holes. You can have an edit for fill in the blank because, you know, if you have like my book, my first book has some significant items, so books specifically, that I needed to track and make sure where they were, or maybe artifacts or things like that. So it's important to do all the necessary edits to make sure your book is the best it can be. But once we're done with self-editing, so that's how we'll go. So once you do the self-editing, you'll be able to determine what type of editor you need, where your weaknesses are, so you can hire a professional editor to do that. Now, number 2 is do your research. You want to make sure your author or the editor understands your book, understands your style of writing, is not going to change it, is not going to try to insert their own thoughts to a point, but they will partner with you in creating the best book it can possibly be. So for me, I do actually sometimes in my editing process, I do make suggestions, but of course it's always up to the author to veto or rewrite or anything. But it's important that your editor understands what you're trying to do with your book, that you really feel good about partnering with them, because that's really what it is. Your editor is going to be your partner in your book. They are going to make your book and take it and polish it, make it the best it can possibly be so that your story shines, not an editor's vision for that. So that's why it's important to always request a sample edit. So that's one of the best ways to know if an editor is good for your book. And a lot of the good editors, now I'm not really sure, but I would say, for me, I would make sure that I got a sample edit done on my book, because there's 2 reasons, and it helps the author and the editor. The editor knows what they're getting into. They know what they have to work with. They get a feel for your story. They get a feel for your style of writing, and they get an idea of if they can help you. So, and on what level they can help you. They get an idea of if the type of editing that they're offering will actually benefit your book. And if they're honest, which a lot of them are, if they're honest, they will tell you, yes, I can help you. I really believe that would be a good fit. This would be a good thing. And then they'll give you a quote from that. On the author side, you as an author will be able to tell from the sample edit if you feel like an editor is a good fit for your book. Because if you get it back and you don't like the edits they make, or you feel like they took too much creative license with your work, or they just, rewrote it and it kind of took your voice out of it, you'll know that from the sample edit. So if you don't feel comfortable with what the editor does with your sample edit, then obviously they're not the editor for your book. And that may be disappointing. It can be frustrating because you have to keep looking for another editor. But it's important to take this step. And like I said, the good editors will do this for you. Some of them are at a level where they might charge for a sample edit. Some of them will do it for free, but I would still encourage you, if you're going to partner with an editor, to get a sample edit done, because you need to know if they're going to be a good fit for you and a good fit for your manuscript, because ultimately you are partners. Okay. Another tip here is do not skimp. So this is kind of one of my, I don't want to say beefs, that's a little strong, but I have seen a lot. I read a lot. I read a lot of books. I think I'm up to almost 60 this year so far. I read a lot of books, and it amazes me when I see people who shout out their editor, and I'm just like, are you sure this was edited? Like, you paid for this? Like, I feel bad because I know, it's one thing if like an author edits their own book, and I will just say for this, because I am an author, I'm also an editor. I'm also a human being. I realize that sometimes you just cannot afford editing. I get that. I will say every single book out there can benefit from an editor, but I understand if the funds just aren't there. That's why there are self-editing tools, and that's why I have the self-editing ebook bundle, which I didn't even really try to plan to talk about much today, but it is on my website if you're interested, because it will help you through that self-editing process. So if you are unable to afford an editor, it'll help you polish your book yourself, just to help you smooth it out a little. So anyway, but that being said, every book can benefit from an editor. And a lot of times one of your biggest expenses may be editing. It is expensive, especially if you have a high word count, because editors will generally charge per word. So if you have a high word count, and it's just tricky. So if you want to put your best work out into the world, editing and hiring an editor is one of the best ways to do that, because they will be able to polish your book until it shines. They'll work with you to make a amazing product that you would not be able to do on your own. Okay, so don't skip. Readers can see cheap editing a mile away. Especially me, because I look for that, but not intentionally, but I just do, because, editor and author myself, anyway. But here's the thing too. Cheap isn't necessarily bad. You might find an editor just starting out that is trying to get their portfolio built up. So that's why the sample edit is so important. They may be a great editor for you, and you might be able to get a really great deal because they're just starting out. Now, of course, with experience, you get, a lot more benefits, things like that. And that's great. But if you really can't pay for it, one of your best bets might be finding someone who's actually really talented at editing, but just doesn't have a portfolio built up yet. And they might be able to give you a reduced rate because they're trying to, kind of get started. And then they'll probably ask you for a testimonial. So that you can help other authors find them if you're happy with them. So anyway, so that's always a good thing. And the last tip for finding your ideal editor is to ask around. Ask your author friends, post on Instagram, post on Facebook, ask around anyone you know who has ever hired a book editor. Look in the back of books that you like. In the acknowledgement section sometimes on the copyright page, they'll put the name of the editor. I think I might have even seen it in the cover ones, but I read a lot of ebooks, so I'm not sure if I read a lot of paperbacks anymore. But anyway, so it's a good idea to maybe pick up a book that you like, especially if it's an indie published book. They'll usually shout out their editor in the acknowledgement section if you liked the editing done in that book. Always ask around for other authors. You can search certain hashtags on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or wherever you like to hang out. Anyway, so you can search that way, get to know the prospective editor, even if, like, for example, say you're writing your first book and you're going to want to hire an editor. It's going to be a few months from now, but it's probably a good idea to start looking, because then you can start getting your feelers out. You can start paying attention for that when you look on other authors' stories, or you see another author mention they're working with an editor, and you can reach out to them and say, hey, do you like your editor? Are they, open for taking new clients? I would like to reach out to them. And the author community is great. They just are. They're, for the most part, really welcoming and supportive and positive. So I would think that you'd get pretty good response with DMing someone about their editor, because people love to talk about things they love. So if someone is really happy with their editor, I'm sure they are more than happy to refer you to them. So, okay, so I said if you stick around to the end, I will give you a free bonus. So I have a free editing ebook. It's a long title, but anyway, it's basically questions to ask your prospective editor. It's 10 questions, but it also goes through the whole editing process. It gives you the details on the different types of editing, like we talked about. It goes into a little more detail about that. It walks you through the process, how to know when you're ready for an editor, what types of questions to ask, And then also the answers to those questions that you're looking for. So you're not just asking questions, you're like, well, I don't know if that's a good answer or not. I got you covered on that. I also put in there like what kinds of answers you're looking for. And it's just a really good resource for you, completely free. It's the link is in my bio on Instagram for it. And I think I put it right at the top, it's free editing ebook. And then I put it in the description for the YouTube and Facebook channel. And if you're watching the IGTV replay, it'll be there in the description as well. But definitely check that out because it is a great free resource. It helps you walk through the whole process and feel confident and have all the tools that you need to reach out to your ideal editor. Once you start looking for them and you find some that you want to connect with, then these are the questions that you can ask, things that you want to find out, and it might spark some more ideas of things that you specifically want to know about your book and about the editor that you will be hiring. All right, so definitely check that out. And if you want to go deeper, I also put the link to my How to Work with an Editor masterclass. Also up on my website, I believe it's in my link in my bio on Instagram, but it'll be in the IGTV replay as well in the caption. So thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. I hope that this was really helpful. I hope that you find your best editor for your book. And if you find someone that you wanted to hire but didn't work out, or maybe they just weren't the right fit, trust your gut. Acknowledge that it's just not the right fit for you, or maybe not the right time or whatever, and keep going, keep looking, because your ideal editor is out there. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you soon, Facebook and YouTube.